latest episode of the Talking Balls podcast. It's a bit different, this one, so it's a chance for us to talk about the year we've just had, and we started the podcast in June last year. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happened since June, both in our podcast and on and off the table. And of course, during that time, I brought in my co-host, and I'll let Lee say hello for himself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be back here. Great to be doing the podcast, and Happy New Year. All the best for 2022.
Nice one, Lee. So yeah, Happy New Year to everybody, and I hope everyone got some kind of rest over the period there. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the episode so far, how it's going, and reflect a little bit on what we've done in the first 6 months really of the podcast. And we'll talk then about the season so far, who we're excited about seeing, some of the major talking points about the snooker season so far as well. And we'll talk about, where we want to go with this and how it's going, and potential future guests and the direction of the podcast. I actually listened, I don't know if you got the chance, Lee, but I listened to the Talking Snooker podcast, which was quite an epic one. It was nearly 3 hours with Dave Hendon. I'm not sure if you got the chance, but that was quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I've not got around to that yet. It's been a busy lead up on the way to Christmas and New Year, but that's something I'm going to listen to. But I had to put quite a bit of time away for that one. It's a marathon.
Yeah. You either have to go for it and just kind of blitz it, or break it up into pieces. But it's really interesting. I think what was good from my point of view listening to it was that you get a good insight into how they go about putting the podcast together, and some of the practicalities of it. Obviously, their knowledge of the sport is immense. But it's a really good, interesting listen. We do get mentioned when they talk about Neil Robertson's comments around the Crucible and just some of the news that came out, and how that obviously came from this podcast. But they're really good. What they do there is cool, and for me, the more the merrier, really, in terms of anyone who's talking about the sport on a podcast. It's got to be good for the sport, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Those guys, as you say, they do a fantastic job. They've really got the finger on the pulse when it comes to the snooker. They must watch a hell of a lot of snooker. And of course, they cover a lot of other sports as well. So they're busy guys. Yeah,
they're in the know, aren't they? It's really interesting to hear what they do. And if you follow them on social media, you get a good feel for the writing for Metro and different papers and publications. So what I was going to do, I was just going to look through. So I'm just kind of looking to the side a little bit, because I've got my list of episodes that we've done since June when we launched. And the first one we had when we started to talk about, going outside of the snooker 19 game that we all kind of got to know each other on. The first one that we had, certainly I started in the early days myself, and I'll just quickly run through who I had on the podcast. So the first one, and always going to be really grateful to this person, because he gave me the first chance to speak to a snooker player for the podcast, and that was Ollie Lyons. Obviously kind of comes from a family that's well known. Peter's well known as a player as well. He was a lovely fella, Lee. I don't know whether you had much chance to see him in action, but had an interesting start to the season. But as a fella, just came across as a really great bloke.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? He came across really well, and he's from the Northern Snooker Centre in Leeds, which it's got to be the best snooker club in the country, in my opinion. So the standard in that club's great, and I've seen him kicking about that club quite a few times. Yeah, he's a lovely guy, and as you say, he really came across well.
Yeah, and always indebted to him, because he was our first guest in terms of one of the pro players, so he was kind enough to spend time. And that was an interesting time when we launched the podcast in June, because it was pre-season. We'd had the Crucible, lots of thinking about the next season, so maybe in a way we could get a bit more access because they weren't in tournaments. The second one we had was Joe Perry, so I was really chuffed to get Joe on, because obviously being such an experienced player and a big name in the sport, he came across really well. We did it in 2 parts, because we did the first part and then he moved to his snooker room, so he's got his own snooker room, although I've just seen on social media that he was selling his star table. But again, in terms of top people, in terms of coming across well, talking openly about the sport, I mean, Joe was fantastic.
Yeah, as he says, he's a lovely guy. He's nicknamed the Gentleman. He's supported our podcast by taking part in the Christmas quiz, and obviously a fantastic snooker player as well. So it was great to see Joe.
Yeah, I mean, his season hasn't quite lifted off this season, really, has it, so far? For somebody with the record that he's got, he has found it hard in the early rounds, and but at the same time, I haven't watched too much snooker. I think there's a lot of coverage, which is fantastic, but a lot to keep up with. But I've heard him commentating again this season, and he's fantastic in terms of his punditry and being able to talk about the sport from the inside.
Yeah, he's a great pundit, Joe, and I've really enjoyed his commentary as well. I don't know if maybe Joe himself's thinking that maybe his career's sort of in its twilight, selling his table at home. Maybe he should keep that.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah,
and obviously getting into the commentary and the punditry. So maybe, without sort of saying it, maybe Joe's thinking his career's maybe coming to an end.
You can see him in that kind of almost that Alan McManus kind of mode, really, can't you? Kind of taking that transition across, and I think he'd become a really good broadcaster, actually.
Yeah, as you say, he's a great pundit, commentary. So he's not going to be out of the game once his career stops. It'll be great to see Joe in the punditry role.
Yeah, he'll be around for a while, no doubt. Then we had Gary Wilson, and that was an interesting episode. If I'm honest, I wasn't sure what to expect from that because I didn't know a lot about Gary, and what I did know was that he'd obviously been quite well publicised mental health issues before, and I think he'd had a tricky time, and particularly during the period where nobody was at the games and everyone's at Milton Keynes. Again, as with every player that we've had on, just a really great character, really down to earth, nice guy. Actually, he's had quite a good season so far, I would say. He's done well in some of the tournaments, and he's certainly had tournament 147 as well.
Well, that's right. Obviously, the British Open, it was a great achievement to get to the final of the British Open. He was beaten by Mark Williams, but if you're getting to finals, that's got to do a lot for your mental health.
Yeah. It certainly seems to come back with some real verve, and hopefully, life's settling down a bit for him. It was also interesting to get an insight into his gaming. He's a big gamer, and he had quite a big, elaborate setup that he showed me on the video, which, and I think getting a bit of a feel for the player outside of the sport for some of our interviews is really interesting. Yeah,
definitely. It's just like all of the interviews we've done. It's great to see sort of the players in their houses and the rooms that they're in at the time. Obviously, we've done Mark King as well.
A
bit later on, and the first thing I noticed was the Northern Ireland trophy on the shelf.
Yeah, that was good.
So it's great to speak to these guys and see their surroundings.
Yeah, definitely. And I know WST are doing some of that as well. I mean, I think they had Yang Bing Tao on the other week, and Rob Walker sneaking around his fridge and all sorts of things, and underneath sofas and what have you.
Wonder if he found that money.
Yeah, I don't know what he found and whether he's kept it to himself. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'd definitely had a sweep under the sofa if he was snooping around. Stephen Holdworth was the next one, and again, in terms of players getting the chance to commentate or be on the broadcasting side, he's had a bit of that with the Championship League. And that was, I like the Stephen Holdworth one. I'm ex-RAF, and he was playing. He does his practicing at RAF Waddington in near Lincoln, and again, just came across as quite humble. He's kind of trying to make his way in the sport, but he's practicing a lot with people like Michael Holt and some other players. Just that belief and that trying to get that break, really, so that he starts to fly up the rankings. And again, tricky start to the season for some of these guys, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen's like so many of the other players. I think it would just take one or two good results, and then they'd be flying, because they're fantastic players, all these guys that are on tour, and I think they just need that little bit of a break. Yeah,
without doubt. And again, really all-around nice guy. The next one I had was one of the ones where you pinch yourself when you talk to them, because you think, I can't believe I'm talking to this guy. We didn't do it on the Zoom or the video. We did it down the phone, which brought its own challenges, because you can't really read body language. You can't expect when they're going to stop talking, etc.
Yeah.
And the line wasn't fantastic, but it was hopefully still satisfying for people to listen. And that was Clive Everton.
Yeah, that's right. I wish I was on board when you interviewed Clive. I was such a fan of Clive Everton's, his commentary back in the day, and he knows so much about the game. And listen to you speak to him about the snooker scene magazines, which I get every month as well. Just a fantastic ambassador for snooker. It was great to listen to that one.
Yeah, and a true gentleman. Again, you talk about Joe Perry, a true gentleman, Clive. I mean, and what he doesn't know, you know. But you know, again, just to spend time with someone who, you know, without real status in the broadcasting world, but he took time out to do it, and such a lovely guy. What I enjoy most, I know you're more into the technical side as a player yourself. I think I'm more into the human side and learning about the person, and just came away from Clive just thinking, what an all-round lovely fella, what a smashing guy, somebody you'd like to sit around with at Christmas in front of the fire.
Yeah, great guy, and he's got so many stories to tell, and we really wish him the best of health.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we did recount the Dennis Taylor story when he fell off his chair and grabbed Dennis's tie. We did talk about that. Which is brilliant.
I was actually watching that match at the time. I think it was Jamie Burnett that was playing at the time, and I was watching that. I thought, what the hell's going on here?
Oh dear, fantastic. Jackson Page, this was the last one I did before you came in. So I met Jackson, again, interesting fella. He's one of the up and coming players who, looking at his record last season, I mean, he had lots of last round deciders, lots of really close matches against high ranked players. Works with Mark Williams, obviously comes out of that kind of stable. And I think he's a younger player. He's again finding his way. I learned that he breeds fish. I didn't think people knew much about that. And when we had a chat, it was nice to meet him. And again, I think he's somebody who, as you say, there's a lot of players just on the edge. One really deep run in the tournament, a ranking tournament, could really transform where they're at. He's another one of those, isn't he?
Oh, he definitely is. And you know, he seems to have been around for a long time, but he's still so young. So you know, I know playing at that age, not that I played at that level, but it must be quite difficult, you know, to get a foothold in terms of stuff. I think there's more to come from Jackson Page. He's a great potter as well.
Yeah, gets around the table nicely. Then you came in, and so I think, and personally, I think that's been really useful and helpful, because I think it gives the listener two voices as well as the person we're interviewing, so it mixes it up a bit. But also, I think just your love for the sport, which is evident when you talk about it, and you know, your interest in how people practice and some of the technical aspects is added a lot to the podcast, I think. And I wondered how you found that first one we did was with Hayden, which is a lesser known player who's in Nottinghamshire like myself, but he is somebody again on the edge of the tour, and one day I think will be on the tour.
Yeah, do you know, when you asked me to do this at the beginning, I'm sure I said no to you at the start, because it was such a scary prospect. You know, it's certainly out of my comfort zone, this sort of thing. But I'm glad I said yeah, because I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed meeting the players, and it's good to be taken out of your comfort zone, I think, every now and again. And it was great to interview Hayden as my first one, because he was such a nice guy and really put me at ease. But also as well, you're really good at this, so you put me at ease as well. So it was great. You know, it was a great start for me. Yeah,
and again, just a lovely guy who you just wish well. Everyone I've had on here, I've just gone away thinking, oh, I just hope you do well and have a good season.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a couple more that was released after Hayden, which I did on my own. They were just released a bit later. So the two of them were the Superfans episode, where we got Kelly Barker, we got Front Row Brian, and we got Superstar Brian as well. And there was a good story behind that. That was really fun, and I think we'll do that again at some point before the Crucible, and your involvement as well, because there were people who see it in a different way. They're not players, but their knowledge of the sport, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. Superfans. I watched that one, Michael, and it was really funny, really interesting. It was good to get those guys' insights into the sport, and you know, they've got a bit of connection with the players as well. No, it was really fun. It was fun, that one.
Yeah, they're really good. It was nice dynamic, really, with all of them in the room, really, virtually. And
Yeah.
the other one who did that came out after that, but before you joined, was Michael Holt, the Hitman. Again, for me, it was a buzz actually, because I'm Nottingham. I'm in Nottingham. I'm a Forest fan. So is he. Obviously, the two biggest names from Nottingham, really, I guess, him and Anthony Hamilton.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Again, so down to earth, really funny guy. Made me laugh a lot, and came across as that kind of guy you could meet in the pub and just have a few drinks with, have a good laugh. And yeah, he seems a good fellow actually.
Yeah, well, he's exactly that, isn't he? He's such a character. He's a character in the main tour. And I remember a story about Michael at Pontins back in the day, early 2000s. He was still an amateur at the time, but he was very close to turning professional. And we used to have midnight flyers at night. It was like a £5 to enter, and it would start at midnight, and you would play right through the night, hopefully. And Michael walks into the room and says, "I don't know why you've all appeared here tonight. I'm winning this." And but that was him. He was like even a character back then. And we had him on the Christmas quiz as well, with his wife Amy, and just lovely people. Really, really good people. And then we got back to the ones with yourself, and the next one I'm going to talk about is one that talk about throwing you in at the deep end. This for me was another pinch yourself moment, really. It's so early in the life of the podcast, and it was one of your first ones. And we had a little known Australian player called Neil Robertson. Some people might have heard of, a bit obscure. We had him on. We had a great time, didn't we? Well, exactly that. Thrown in at the deep end. It was my second one that I've done, and he was great, wasn't he? He spoke so openly, and he was so generous with his time. I think in total it was like 2.5 hours. We spent half an hour chatting in the green room, and then we recorded for 2 hours. He was so open and such a nice guy. It was a pleasure.
It was an interesting story, wasn't it? So away from him being a nice guy, which he clearly is, but the story around giving everything up to come over the other side of the world, losing his place on the tour, getting back on the tour. I think it's easy to forget, isn't it? It's also the way with the Chinese players who are starting to really make an impact as well, where you kind of think it's hard to imagine as an English person or a Scottish person, it's hard to imagine going over to Australia or China to play one of their national sports almost, and giving everything up and leaving everybody behind. I mean, that alone, before you even get to the sport itself, must be really quite tricky.
Yeah, it's such a daunting thought, to travel to the other side of the world. And of course, he fell off the tour. So to have that resolve, to decide that he was going to give it another shot and come back over, it says a lot about the guy, and what a great player he is, and he's proven.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I have a new appreciation for his game, really, and I just enjoy watching him. He's just so neat and tidy, a great cue action, isn't he? He's a fantastic player. Comes across as a good family man as well. Then we got on to, I'm kind of racing through a bit, really, because we've done a lot. I mean, actually, when you look at it, we've done now 40 episodes, and I mean, I'm counting the early days when we were doing them within the game, the PlayStation 19 game, but we started with. We started around episode 10, episode 8 was Oliver, and then we've done most of the rest really since then. So we've covered a lot of ground with the weekly podcast. The next one was Phil Seymour, the obviously MC presenter extraordinaire. Again, what a larger than life funny character.
Yeah, again, so open and generous with his time again, and as you say, really funny. And he does a great job with MCing and stuff, and I'm sure he's gave us a nod for a backstage tour, when we get a venue together. So
definitely remember that. I definitely remember that. We've got to hold him to that, haven't we? It's
definitely.
We've got it on record, I think. Really good. And actually, again, if you follow his social media, very family orientated, very traditional. It's quite traditional values, I think. I've seen a bit of a spat with somebody when just the other day when he was talking about the BBC saying a certain word on the 6 o'clock news, I think it was, and he felt that was a bit off when you've got kids and that. So he's quite a traditional kind of guy, quite moralistic, I think. But again, I can see why he's a good presenter and a good MC. He's very engaging and quite inspiring the way he kind of talks and motivates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then we had a bit of fun, didn't we? I mean, I'm going to take two players together because they counted as similar in terms of their style, but two players we talked to and we laughed a lot about in terms of their slow game, as they keep getting accused of. And that was Martin O'Donnell, who was episode 24, and also Lee Walker, who was episode 30.
Yeah, both players, again, really nice guys, down to earth, and they were quite happy to talk about, the slow play situation. And, I think they both just really said it's a lack of confidence. That's what sort of holds them back. If they're in amongst the balls and they're confident, they're so much faster. But it was great to speak to them, and they had no problems, talking about it.
No, and in fact, there was a joke about it in the Christmas quiz at Lee's expense, I think, and he took it really well, didn't he? Yeah, they were quality, weren't they? I mean, I think that, it's that thing. It's not a gamesmanship thing. It's clearly, as you say, it's related to how they're feeling on the table. Really, it's because clearly they're capable of playing quicker when they want to. You can see it.
Yeah, and they're great players in their own right as well. In Lee's case, Lee's been on the tour for so long. He's dropped off, but he's got himself back on. So that sort of speaks for itself, really. Yeah,
definitely. Then we have one of the power brokers, if you like, in the sport, leaders of the sport in terms of the chair of the WPBSA, so Jason Ferguson, who, again, talk about engaging characters and seeing how they make relationships work and influence people to get the sport going in other areas. I mean, he's a talented fella, isn't he?
Wow. That was one of my very favourite episodes, that Jason. You could really feel the passion coming through the screen when you were speaking to him.
Yeah.
And talking about his dad back in the day and visiting the social clubs and stuff. That's how it all started for him. But that's what struck me the most, was the passion that he spoke about snooker.
Do you remember him much as a player? I mean, obviously he curtailed his career a little bit to get more involved in the running of the sport, but was he somebody that you looked
up to? Really just maybe caught the back end of Jason's career, but I did see a few matches. Obviously a very talented player, back in the day. He done really well, but I think as soon as he got himself onto the World Snooker Board, I think that was his playing days finished.
There's some work going on here. I'm not sure if it's coming across.
Yeah, I was hoping that was a drill.
The next one we had was Elliot Slessor. We did that one in the car with him and Gary Wilson. That was fun.
Yeah, really fun interview that as well. I obviously missed the Gary Wilson interview. You've done that, yourself. But we got to see a bit of Gary when we interviewed Elliot Slessor. They seem to have quite a bit of banter together while they were driving down the motorway.
Yeah, just a great character. These Northeastern guys. Sorry, I'm going to be jetting in and out here because there's such a lot of noise going on in the background. Yeah, Elliot again, what a great character. I don't know, how bad is this? Can you still hear my voice?
Barely.
Right, the next one was we had yourself in Portugal, and then we talked to Noel Flannery. I mean, I know Noel was someone you enjoyed talking to as well, particularly.
Yeah, I did. Noel was great. Obviously, Noel is very much sort of on the psychological side of snooker, and getting the best out of your game. And he's got a few players like Mark King. He's working with Lee Walker. A great guy, Noel, and it was fascinating to listen to him and what he does with other players. Just a great guy again.
I'd love to know his secrets. He does a lot of work in terms of performance.
Yeah. As you say, he's great at what he does, and he's getting a lot out of the players at the moment. I've noticed the results of the players he's working with, like Mark King's had a good run recently, Stuart Carrington. There's a lot of players he's working with that are doing really well at the moment. So obviously, whatever Noel's doing, it's working.
Yeah, and you got the next one on. You got Brian Achoyski on, French player.
Yeah, really like Brian. I met Brian at a tournament called ICC, the International Challenge Cup. So Brian's a French player. His dad he's also big on the French snooker scene. Great family.
Brian's lovely, isn't it? Stefan Achoyski.
Yeah, Stefan Achoyski. Yeah. So they love their snooker. They're certainly a snooker family, and Brian's an up and coming player, and I think we need to watch out for him.
Definitely, yeah, and such a charming young fellow. Actually, you forget how young he is. Then we had Peter Devlin, so we're getting close now to up to date. Peter Devlin, we put that out over 2, but again, what was really interesting for me about him was that he's very confident, very well spoken, but also quite anxious about his future in the sport in terms of the money and how you could earn a living.
Yeah, and quite rightly so, I would say. He pointed out a few issues, with distribution of prize money and the ranking system, and he's got a lot of good ideas himself, but he's obviously quite a deep person. He thinks a lot about, the game of snooker and how the prize money is being distributed.
Yeah, and he didn't do us a rap, but you can go on YouTube and catch up with him. He's a funny guy.
Yeah, I've got to say his rapping's fantastic.
You mentioned Mark King. I mean, that was a cracking interview, wasn't it? And quite different to most of the other ones.
Yeah, you can tell Mark's a character. I always thought, before we spoke to him, that Mark was a bit of a character, but he certainly proved that when we spoke to him. And again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but what a nice guy. Really down to earth, happy to talk about, all sorts of situations in the snooker. So, no, it was a great interview, that one. Really enjoyed it.
And it seems to me he's one of those players. He had a good run just not long before Christmas, but he looks to me like somebody who even in the new year at some point could get quite a long way into a tournament as well. Yeah,
I think it's the old adage, class is permanent. It certainly applies to Mark. He's been on the tour for so long, and don't think he's ever dropped off the tour. So it shows you what sort of player he is. And yeah, it'd be nice to see him have a deep run in another tournament soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's great to watch. And Rob Walker was the last one we did before the Christmas quiz. I mean, again, it was very kind. He did it en route to York. He was in his car at the service station, but inspiring stories. He seems to live for the moment. He's very grateful for what he's got in terms of just being able to go and follow the sports that he does. And he does a lot of work, but he told us some stories there, didn't he? He told us one about a life-saving attempt, and he just came across to me as just a real life force, actually.
Yeah, and I don't think he'd spoken about that story for quite some time. I think it was, you could still feel the passion in him when he was speaking about the story. But lovely guy, and it was quite funny at the start. We were expecting him maybe to be in a room somewhere, but he was shoving a Greg's pie in his face when we hooked up with him.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was brilliant. And then we had the Christmas quiz, so the kind of the last one really before Christmas, and then we put out the whole Mark King interview in one go, and we've had Jason Ferguson back. We put his one back out again last week, really, because I think it was a good opportunity to hear from the guy who's behind a lot of the future planning for the sport and gave us good insight into what we might expect in the new year. So we repeated that one. But the Christmas quiz, we got quite a good turnout for that. That was a really different podcast, but yeah, I mean, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great fun. It did have a sense that it was sort of more relaxed, and we got a mix of players and fans, so it was great. Really enjoyed that one.
So, and just thinking next year, we've talked a bit about players who have come forward. I mean, who are you excited about in this 2022, and looking at the rest of this season ahead of the Worlds? Who's catching your eye? Who are you're looking out for?
Well, for me, there's probably just the one player, his recent success was fantastic. It's Xiao Xingtong. You know, I've always been quite a bit of a fan of his. I've always thought he would break through. And I think now that he's broken through by winning the UK, I think there's a lot of good things to come from him.
Yeah, you can see, I think Mark said it, didn't he, Mark King, when we talked about almost the conveyor belt and the wave of Chinese players and how good they're going to be. And he seems to be potentially spearheading that, doesn't he? You almost forget that Ding Junhui is still kind of almost the, you know, the trailblazer. But yeah, he looks like he's got the whole package, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's such a heavy scorer. You know, I think maybe he's still got a bit to learn on the safety side of the game. But, you know, he's scoring. I think he made, in a best of 9, he made 4 centuries in the 90, I think, and won his matches at the end of last year. So, as you say, a fantastic player, and we'll see a lot of him at the business end of the tournaments, I think.
Yeah. Is there any of the established players that you expect to see up there more as well? I mean, personally, I've always got I don't know if it's a soft spot or whatever, but when he's on it, he's amazing. And I know he's got a lot of things that seem to happen off the table. But Mark Allen, I mean, again, Mark Allen's one of those that I always think, this guy, every tournament, he could go all the way.
Yeah, I mean, he won his home event, the Northern Ireland trophy recently. And that was sort of in the middle of having problems off the table. Mark's, he's just so classy, you know, as a guy and a player. He'll be back. You know, I expect good things from him this year. He's just too good.
Yeah, too good not to be there, isn't he? And obviously, you know, John Higgins, a succession of ranking finals where he loses in the finals. But again, as you say, class is permanent, isn't it? Form is temporary, class is permanent.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, all the guys that we've interviewed throughout the last 6 months or so, you know, I'd love to see those guys do really well, because I think once you've spoken to them, you're always sort of looking up in the results and hoping to do well. So I wish all those guys well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it feels like they're friends of the podcast, whether they consider themselves that, but I think we can consider themselves friends of the podcast. So, yeah, so it's a good time really to say to everybody who's either listened or been our guests so far, just a great big thank you. Really, you know, we the guy said it on the Talking Snooker podcast. You know, they don't tend to pay appearance fees or expenses or anything. You know, these guys do it because I think they care about the sport. They want people to talk about it, and obviously it's not bad for their profile as well. So hopefully we've got a lot to look forward to in this new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Onwards and upwards. Everybody that we've approached, you know, to have a chat with, they've always been really respectful, kind, and very generous with their time. So I can't see any difference to that in 2022, and long may it continue.
Yeah, let's hope so. I think the bit that I think we probably find harder in some ways, and this is really being respectful to the colleagues like Dave Hendon and Phil and Nick on Talking Snooker. I think it's the access to the players. I think we're not in the trade in the same way, if you like. We're not getting to do press conferences or interview them for papers. So there is an element where we are scrapping around a lot to try and get our guests on and to find a way to entice them to spend some time with us. But that's part of the fun, really. And in a way, what it maybe does at times is gives us access to players who are perhaps not at the top end all the time, who might become those names in future. And then we'll be able to look back and go, well, actually, it was really interesting that day when we spoke to that player who was number 75 in the world.
Yeah, and really, you know, what a great sport we've got, because as you always say, Michael, you know, if you're trying to get a Premier League footballer to come on and do a podcast with you, it just would not happen. So, you know, the sport we love, it's a great sport, and, you know, the guys are just really down to earth. Yeah,
and it's fantastic. And so I think it's and the biggest thank you, of course, is to people who listen or watch on the YouTube. And, you know, I keep an eye on the stats and I share some tidbits with Lee at times. We talk about it. You know, it's hard to know what good figures are because we've got nothing to compare it to. But I think what we've seen is a growth over the time since June. August was big for us in terms of comparatively, because that was around the time that Neil's Robertson's one broke. And if you get Neil on anything, I think you're going to get a lot of people listening. But hopefully more people all the time are discovering the podcast and interacting with us. We've had some correspondence on email and social media and some feedback, which we're always welcome. And we want to keep getting interesting guests on. we're up for any suggestions, and if people know others they think they'd like to hear from, then please point them our way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as you said before, Michael, we're relatively new on the podcast scene. We've only been going just over, 6 months, but obviously we appreciate, any views, any likes on social media, and we've had that, and everybody's been so kind to us in their comments.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's such a friendly sport, and I think it almost feels like a club where you're in now, and it's everybody's trying to just make it as good a club as it can be, as get the snooker world and more people into it as well, get youngsters into it, and make it just a more fun place for everyone to be around. So yeah, and I guess my final thank you really is to you, Lee. You've joined, after a little bit of negotiating, and I know that at the time it wasn't your natural place to go to. Do you feel different about it now than maybe in that first one or two that you did? Is it getting easier?
Yeah, it's getting slightly easier. Obviously, I'll always be out in my comfort zone, but that big check that you send me every month does help.
So, yeah, it's a very bouncy one though, isn't it? That's the trouble.
No, but I've got to say, Michael, it has become a bit easier, and I look forward to it a lot more now. It's great to speak to, people that I admire greatly, because I'm a huge fan of snooker, and I suppose I need to thank you, because you make it so much easier for me. Where there would be a bit of dead air, you're picking up a lot of the slack. So thanks.
Yeah, it's a double act really, isn't it? It's a partnership. So the team works. And I think I'm looking back to when you're in your element, like on the Christmas quiz, and you're giving away half points everywhere. That became a real talking point, and we all made a big joke of it, and that was great because it was a running theme all the way through. And for anyone who tuned into that and didn't figure out what the mystery noise was at the start, I can reveal it now. And it was Joe Perry's dog. Was it Nellie? I think I've got a feeling it was called Nellie.
I think so. I can't remember that well, but I think it was. But what was funny about that, Michael, is Joe was completely oblivious to the noise because he's so used to it. Everybody else was saying, "What's that noise?" But Joe was so oblivious to it.
And it was one of those where you feel like you can't really say anything because it might be embarrassing, whatever that noise is, or it might be might highlight something a bit crude or embarrassing to someone, but it was so obvious, and I could see everyone laughing on it, and I thought, I've got to know what that is.
Yeah, everybody was looking to find out what the noise was, and you were the brave one in the room. You asked.
It was almost the elephant in the room, but in the end it was more of a bulldog, or I don't know if it was a bulldog, but it was more of the dog in the room, wasn't it? It was great.
Yeah.
So a lot of fun, and we'll obviously, what I'm hoping is that we do it next year because we're still around and we're still being able to do this, and we're getting good quality guests on that people enjoy. So the final thank you to everybody involved, really, and hopefully you stick with us. We'll keep doing some interesting stuff for you, and look forward to the rest of the season.
Yeah, I can only echo what you said there, Michael. Looking forward to the year ahead. I'm sure we'll get some great guests and some real interesting guests. And here's to 2022.
Yeah, cheers, Lee. We've got a few in the pipeline, so you'll hear from us again next Wednesday. So keep your Wednesdays clear to listen in. And thanks for everybody's support. Thanks very much. Cheerio,
everyone.